Seaweed is sort of a new way of thinking for me. So hopefully this will make sense to a degree. Thank you very much. So I'll start. So good morning, everyone, again, and thank you. So in today's paper, drawing on material eco-criticism and the eco-Gothic, I will be discussing how shifting representations of seaweed in Oceanic Weird fiction helpfully illustrates the movement from thalassophobia, or fear of the sea, in early 20th century weird fiction towards thalassophilic feelings of submersion and interconnection in its 21st century counterpart. What depictions of seaweed meaningfully contributes in the understanding of oceanic temporalities as non-linear and entangled. While old weird tales such as William Hope Hodgson's Thing in the Weeds primarily depicts seaweed as an atmospheric motif of fear, disgust, and crucially entrapment, new weird narratives such as River Solomon's The Deep, in contrast, articulate seaweed as a material semiotic link between a memorial network that connects past and present, the human and the non-human, within the harrowing context of the Middle Passage and the Atlantic slave trade. In doing so, seaweed comes to understand the interconnected, mutable, and uprooted nature of being and becoming at sea. In other words, seaweed representations participate in what I tentatively call a certain thalassophilic feeling, one that conjunctly articulates the interplay between thalassophobia and thalassophilia. I borrow here, almost jokingly, from Sigmund Freud's frustrated attempt at defining what the French writer Romain Rolland defined as a, quote, feeling which he would like to call a sensation of eternity, a feeling as of something limitless, unbounded, as it were, oceanic. One that furthermore corresponds to, quote again, a feeling of an indissoluble bond of being one with the external world as a whole, unquote. This feeling of interconnectivity with the world at large, equated with the immensity and fluidity of the ocean, serves as a connective link between the undersea and an effective response to its particular contours in contradistinction with that of land. Margaret Coyne draws attention to the often fantastic and Gothic language used by divers in their attempt to express in the word what they saw and felt underwater, attempts that often fell short of their own mission to begin to encompass the experience of being submerged under underwater ecologies of seaweed, kelp, corals, and the like. Well, ably, again, engaging with the plurality of experience, accounts, and fiction that the undersea has inspired explains how, quote, the underwater worlds of human imagination seem endlessly changeable, unquote, and that, quote, the history of representations of underwater environments is in complex, plural, and often contradictory forms and significance, unquote. Helen Rozwadowski, in turn, notes how, quote, imagined features of the ocean have been intertwined with reflections on human evolution and what it means to be human, quote. Turning my attention to new materialist articulations again of the ocean as a particularly inspiring example of Stacey Zaleno's notion of transcorporeality that sees, quote, the human as substantially and perpetually interconnected with the flows of substances and the agencies of environment, I look at the ways in which the depiction of seaweed in River Solomon and William Hope Hodgson offers a meaningful avenue to discuss such an ontology of the sea. First, indeed, I return to early 20th century oceanic weird fiction in order to contextualize a little bit the movement from thalassophobia to thalassophilia. The old oceanic weird of the early 20th century, helmed by such authors as William Hope Hodgson and H.P. Lovecraft, indeed, often deploy seaweed and other marine vegetation as an adversarial presence, which frustrates ships and sailors in their movements, or as a telltale sign of an unnerving and putrid presence surfacing from the depths of the ocean. Through the semantic field of the sludge and the slime, these authors construct oceanic ecologies within a logic of dread and revulsion. This first wave, as it were, of oceanic weird reifies the sea as a space of horror and dread, when the unnerving and disruptive qualities of the sea are mirrored by the monstrous physicality of the creature that dwell under its surface, and indeed by the seemingly alien contours of its flora and vegetation. It deploys a deep organicity that situates in the ocean the repulsive quality of the belly, the gloopy totality of the tentacle, and the liquid mobility of the ooze and slime. This discourse, thus, is that of the thalassophobic, a subset of Simon C. Stock's ecophobia, summarized by Sean Harrington as, quote, a phobic response to the sea and deep open water, quote, which in turn produces the feeling of oceanic horror, or as it continues, a terror that comes from the discord between the reflective surface and the depths beneath, that draws our gaze into dark places from which we may never return, unquote. So in William Hope Hodgson's The Thing in the Weed, a ship and her crew find themselves temporarily engulfed in a thick fog and subsequently attacked by an unseen force with a pestilential smell, When the fog clears, they realize that they have found themselves slowed down and ensnared in a large patch of seaweed, indeed, quote, all around the vessel, there lay a submerged spread of weed for maybe a good quarter of a mile up on every side, unquote. And within that weed field, as it calls in the narrative, what attacked them is revealed to be a giant squid hidden in the weed. The creature appears almost merged with the surrounding kelp, as quote, 3 of its massive feelers lay twined in and out among the clumpings of the weed, unquote. As the captain draws fire at the creature starts to thrash, whereupon, quote, and the sea seemed almost to boil in one great cauldron of weed and water, with that, quote unquote, with that large patch of seaweed becoming, again, a whirling boil of tentacles, weed, and seawater. The squid subsequently emerges from the water to heave itself aboard the vessel, both materially and metaphorically amalgamated with the weed. As the narrative details how it is the weed itself, which rose up into a great mound over 20 feet in height and more than a ton of it slopped overboard. The creature, essentially one vast leathery shape, all wreathed with weed fronds and seemingly drenched with blood and curious black liquids, is only temporarily dispatched through the liberal use of revolvers and explosives, disappearing once more into the darkness below and the sea, below water and seaweed. Hodgson's short story there is a remarkable example of thalassophobia, and it fundamentally equates seaweed, not to mention oceanic wildlife, as a giant squid, with danger, monstrosity, and indeed filth and pestilential odors. Seaweed here ostensibly appears as wild and overabundant, reminiscent of Dawn Keatley's plant horror, as she argues that, quote, at its most basic, plant horror marks human dread of the wildness of vegetal nature, its untamability, its pointless excess, its uncontrollable growth. Plants embody an inscrutable silence and implacable strangeness, unquote. The weird indeed is a literature of excess. Monsters of the weird ooze and dribble with goo with strange combination and concatenations of the animal, vegetal, and the fungal. If the Gothic is a multiplicity, then the weird is profoundly rhizomatic, which I'll say, a contagious proliferation that, like a mushroom or indeed like seaweed, appears suddenly from everywhere and fundamentally disturbs boundaries and perspectives. This overabundance, moreover, further illustrates the obfuscating capabilities of such large patches of weeds or seaweed. In its ostensible overfecundity, this spread of weed hides the monstrous danger underneath, preventing easy recognition and highlighting the interplay of surface and depth that characterize thalassophobic discourses. As the ship and her crew extirpate themselves from the weeds, the sailors look in trepidation at the weed. Quote, as we stood and looked, something wavered up out of the heart of the weed, a long, tapering, sinuous thing that curled and wavered against the dawn light, and presently sank back again into the demure weed, a veritable spider of the deep, waiting in a great web that Dame Nature had spun for it in the eddy of the tides and currents. The metaphor of the screen-eyed spider with the weed as its web powerfully encapsulates the ensnaring capacities of the weed and the ecophobic underpinnings of the tale, offering a vivid description of the sea as a tentacular space of hidden dangers. The Oceanic Weird indeed distorts the land-based imagery of the spider into a monstrous thalassophobic fantasy, where seaweed mirrors and doubles with tentacles and appendages of squid. The final words of the tale clearly articulate seaweed as a monstrous space of isolation, as the ship finally, quote, sailed away northwards with strengthening trades and left that patch of monstrousness to the loneliness of the sea, unquote. The ocean indeed is not seen not as a place, but as a space between spaces, an isolated environment safe for the dangers within. The tale is just underscored by a thalassophobic underpinnings which locate within the materiality of seaweed, a dangerous capacity to threaten the good exercise of commercial ventures, crucially posing as a threat to colonial and mercantile sea-based ventures. This lies at the heart of the Oceanic Weird, concurrent with Deckard and Oloff, that the Oceanic Weird emerged within a larger tradition of ecophobic tales at the turn of the 20th century in a world still dominated by European colonialism, where they continue the Atlantic Ocean and its weird creatures mark the limits of capitalism's attempts to control the submarine world. Thalassophobia in the weird, in other words, stems in part from anxiety surrounding fear toppling of white Western supremacy, as patches of weed such as the one in Hodgson's short story undermines Schultz's hegemony. I move now to a contemporary reading of River Solomon's The Deep as an evocative example of new oceanic weird discourses, which instead of reifying the African hybrids as a subhuman and bestial other, whose monstrosity partly serves to underline racist and white supremacist fantasies, celebrates such a collision of land and water physicalities as a means of exploring possible potentialities, as well as negotiating the complicated consequences of climate change and the anthropocene. The Deep, as we shall see, is a formidable example of what Stephanie K. Dunning calls the black weird, where traditional weird tropes find new purchase as evocations of the horrors of white hegemony and violence perpetrated upon individuals of color. The black weird, Dunning argues, quote, represents a rich textual exploration into the violation and absurdity of white racism as experienced from within a black worldview, unquote. The Deep argue illustrates black weird considerations and subverts oceanic weird tropes in order to articulate the horrors of the moral passage, where, quote, whiteness bears the sign of the uncanny, and the weird seeks through the sources of trauma in and under the water. The Deep is a story of black subjectivities being destroyed and remade within the ocean's abyss. In its poetics of the relation, Edouard Glissant poignantly describes the sea within the harrowing context of the Middle Passage and the Atlantic slave trade as a space which comes to signify an ontological shift, a temporal and spatial dislocation separating the men, women, and children abducted from Africa from their home, history, and therefore their identity. The sea within this context is an abyss, one that separates as well as it amalgamates. It obliterates history, becomes a space of material and affective dissolution, as much as it becomes a site of memory, loss, and commemoration. It signals a crucial shift between the forgotten stolen past and the uprooted present, and uprooting made even more poignant through the imagery of algae and seaweed. As Glissant crucially explains, the, quote, entire ocean makes one vast beginning, but the beginning of whose time is marked by these balls and chains gone green, unquote. River Solomon's The Deep reimagined the space of ultimate trauma that is the abyss through the hybrid bodies of the Waginera, a siren-like posthumous species birthed from the pregnant women who were thrown overboard slave ships. The ocean in Solomon's novella becomes a space of revitalized agency, emancipatory power, whose transcorporeal materialities construct a vision of the sea as a powerful multi-layered signifier of utopian possibilities. The Waginera come to exemplify the ambivalent and protean capacity of the ocean to represent both colonial power and native resistance, as Bernard Klein and Gesta McIntyre note how the ocean has historically functioned as, quote, a site of loss, dispersal, and enforced migration, but also of new forms of solidarity and effective kinship, unquote. Indeed, through the Waginera, it is the whole history of the Middle Passage that is reclaimed and reinvented within a deep world of underwater pressures and entangled ecologies, liberating from oppressive colonial apparatus and operating as a counterbalance to capitalist ventures which endanger and destabilize the biodiversity and ecological balance. The Deep is violently preoccupied with memory and the non-linear temporalities that both the ocean and post-colonial condition constructs for trauma. The discourse of oceanic temporalities have long oscillated between the trackless void of the historical traumatic excess of history, Atlantic slave trade, colonial enterprises, world wars, and environmental pillaging such as commercial whaling have been encoded in the waters of the Atlantic Ocean and beyond. It is a place without history, at least not recorded history, as John Mack explains. The sea is understood as an empty and hollow place, seen as timeless, where its fluidity is seen not as an action with the continual flow of time, but instead as the tabula rasa, which obfuscates such a passing. Thus consider the sea as atemporal, always of the same liquid immensity for both history and the very time that we're going to score it. This provides a ready-made wild space for colonial and capitalist ventures, virgin waters mirroring the American frontiers, virgin lands as empty and thus ready to be used and abused. As such, visions of the world ocean as aqua nullius is contingent on a Western hegemonic idea of the sea as a space to be traversed, tamed, and conquered, where such patches of seaweed as the one in the Thing in the Weeds only frustrate movement in the colonial endeavor. I must stop for a second. How long do you still have? I'm conscious of length.
You've still got about 6 minutes, so you're perfectly fine.
6 minutes. Thank you. I will have to push a little bit there. On the other hand, oceanic temporalities for the oppressed, colonized, and dispossessed are overflowing with the weight of history, constructing the ocean as full of bodies of the drowned and the enslaved. The Atlantic Ocean, in particular, as one of the main theaters of the slave trade, is understood as an unmarked gravesite by the Lothary, and thus an important space and agent within the, quote, enduring focal point of diasporic cultural memory. I will jump a little bit because I'm conscious of time. So going to Solomon's novella presents the reader. The Solomon's novella, the deep, presents the reader with a narrative explicitly and extensively deconstructs the idea of linear temporality, ferrying instead of a complex and initially problematic layer of temporalities in the ocean's depth, where the biology and ontology of the winger create within an arduous blending of the past and present. Thus, the trauma of the passage of how people's being as part of this space is a passive forever homes her and invades the presence forever homes the Winger and invades their presence. Seaweed. Seaweed then. Well, Seaweed crucially acts as a link between the past and the present. In this novella, it materially functions as a shorthand for the liminal lived experience of the posthuman species that is the Winger. While Seaweed descriptions in the novel are sparse, they nevertheless draw attention to the interplay of temporality and memory that the ocean conjures within the context of the Middle Passage. The first Winger, Zoti, and I must go back first. So you can see that the Winger within this sense are products of the abyssal history of the Middle Passage, as within the narrative, their mothers were pregnant for 2 legs thrown overboard while crossing the ocean on slave ships. These sirens, these mermaids, are directly linked to the abyssal history of the Middle Passage. Within this, Seaweed functions as a link, a material symbolic link between these histories. The first Winger in the narrative, Zoti, is in one of the many flashbacks in the novella that sort of frustrates the sense of linear temporality. Uses Seaweed as a metaphor for the umbilical cord as it tries to recall where they come from. When the creature asks us, quote, where we came from, we say that we only remember a little, remember a face like hers, just like hers. We remember the ocean. We remember chewing the fleshy seaweed that bound us to our first mothers. This poignant reflection underscores the materiality of the link between human Winger and the ocean as a place of memory and birth. Australian Amanus contains in her articulation embodied in her comments that, quote, water not only flows between and connects bodies, it also facilitates new kinds of bodies, unquote. This is probably true of the Winger, as later in the novella, Yutu and her parents join on their now collectively remembering, muse on their first memories of the womb. Amaba, her parents, explained, there's very little difference between a born Winger pup and one still encased in the womb. What if some of your remembrance of dark loneliness as a pup when you're inside a belly, and it was hardly distinguishable from floating in the deep? It is all waters, unquote. The Artificial Deep, as it were, remembers. She remembered the ocean teaching her. She said that she remembers the ocean teaching us to breathe. Once we were born, it would have been too late, but in the womb, it came to us naturally. That is why it changes then. The ocean is understood as fundamentally gestational, as it directly facilitates and guides the birth of the Winger. It is indeed a womb abyss to go back to Glisson. Yet the Winger has also partaken of Glisson's abyssal subjectivities, and thus a Seaweed here becomes redolent of the algae that perforce grows on the white remains of these called balls and chains gone green. Seaweed becomes an important link within confluent materials to create abyssal subjectivities, whereas Aaron Pennant argues living matter like Seaweed reminds us of the subsumption of the dead into the living as an important part of the experience of the Middle Passage. Seaweed becomes a signifier of both rebirth and death, as it is crucial seaweed that is used to bury the Winger when they die into deep coral seaweed kelp. The body, when it is buried, becomes ovoid and thick, looking like a plump-filled bag of waters or an entire womb. The parallels with Glisson is compelling. Seaweed is again an important element in the memory of the Middle Passage, both metaphorically and materially, as here too, as Glisson writes. Navigating a green splendor of the sea still brings to mind coming to life like seaweed, these lowest depths, with their configuration of spatially corroded balls and chain. Seaweed becomes redolent in these chains, as it encases, along with other elements of the ocean, the bodies of the Winger, descendant of the dead of the Middle Passage. Thinking in oceanic terms again, the non-linearity of temporality novel underscores these fractures. Seaweed linking these, drawing links that elide the clear definition of past, present, and future, as all the story's elements in the novella appear all at once. The vivid past is forever a present, and a present that is always interlinked with the past as well as the future. Here, Seaweed draws attention to temporality, as a novel that uses such oceanic elements to underscore the problematics of time and memory, as it says, underscores how, quote, when not properly fortified, a legacy is no more enduring than a wisp of plankton, unquote. In this sense, as Pinnock tells us, the abyssal image of seaweed entangles the material turmoil of churning waters with abyssal histories, as well as ways that nature serves as a living reminder of these histories. Pinnock's powerful finding the sargassum weed as an oceanic counterpart to the rhizome, which Rhizome uses to describe the connectivity of relation within Caribbean ontology, following the middle passage. Both rhizome and sargassum, however, as he continues to provide a way of thinking called the possibility of temporal collapse or disarray. Since rhizomes can self-connect disparate time periods between the past and present, quote, unquote. In other words, again, oceanic materialities of seaweed, kelp, and algae can help in the thinking of non-linear oceanic temporalities, a different movement that underscores hybridity, becoming an ontological movement between a profoundly transcorporeal ocean, a thalassophoric feeling, indeed, that grows out of these direct contacts with the oceanic, as seaweed compellingly comes to help to signify both life and death. In conclusion, and sorry for being a bit running, while the old weird in part underscores a sailing path of thalassophobia through the depictions of overgrown and snaring seaweed, new weird examples like the deep link such oceanic agencies with a material memory of the abyss, finding instead of fear a deep connection with the environment that blends together human but non-human and post-human. Seaweed provides a way of thinking these connections, not only as links, but indeed as being entangled, an entanglement in time and in space that is quite different, indeed, from an ensnarement as seen in all the weird, all oceanic narratives. Thank you.